It's time to pull those belts tight, race fans. The front stretch is coming at you, presented by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs. Now, here's Dan Taylor and Dirk Houston.
Well, good morning to you, race fans, and welcome to the front stretch, presented by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs, online at joeskarting.com. Fast-paced, white-knuckle racing just across the river. Get to joeskarting.com, karting with the K, for all the information and everything you could possibly need for indoor karts. It's going to be a good time. If you haven't gone over to Joe's Karting, we've talked about it so many times that now's the time to do it. The weather's starting to turn. It's getting a little bit chilly. Plus, you can get involved in that hammerhead drawing. All you got to do is go over and tell the cashier when you go race you want to buy a hammerhead race. And then you get entered into the drawing. That's coming up here in about a week or two that they'll make that drawing. Check them out. Make sure to like them on Facebook for all the latest tips, tricks, and information going on at Joe's Karting. And as always, do appreciate Joe's Karting helping out the front stretch and being the title sponsorship for the show. A lot going on for the show in 2017. We'll have more announcements on that probably in January, maybe early February. But some big stuff going on with the show, and a lot of stuff's going on in the in the NASCAR world, Dirk.
But never fear, the Pick'ems contest will be back.
Absolutely, and it doesn't sound like we're going to make any changes. I think that we've pretty much got a sound set of rules with, four?
It's understandable. It's easy. It's free.
Yep.
We hope to put maybe together a little better prize packages this year.
Yeah.
Into the future. I mean, I hope we can get the crewman for a day. I think that was great.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
I think everybody enjoyed that one, and
we've had some great prizes though. Autographed Brad Keselowski hat, which went to Orlando Adams, our champion. We had Brendan Gaughan autograph stuff
for knocking me off my perch. Yep. Orlando, not nice.
Plenty of autographed Sammy Swindell stuff too.
Oh, yeah.
Jack Dover, McKenna Haase, Chris Buescher and Eric Jones and Brendan Gaughan and Brendan Jones, and I mean we had quite a few. I think over 200 items to choose from.
Yeah, everybody that we get to interview at the tracks is usually being more than cordial and signing a few hero cards for us, so that's always nice.
That contest is never too late to sign up, and it'll be here before long. I know when I was sending out the final picks or the final results from the contest, we were 96 days away. I think now we're into the 80s away from the Daytona 500. Of course, you want to get a hold of us before the Daytona 500, maybe a week or two before, or even now, just email us, frontstretch590@gmail.com. If you're listening to this and you want to get involved in the Pick'ems contest, it's about as easy as it can get. Let's talk about some of the news and notes that have been circulating. Boy, silly season didn't take any time getting fired up. We heard some of the first announcements that Monday after Homestead.
Well, not quite as silly as what it normally is because there's not nearly as many big names moving around.
Yeah, the free agent market will get pretty crazy next year. At the end, a lot
of
drivers at the end of 2017 is when their contracts with their current sponsors and teams are up. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with those. But still some big names. Greg Biffle. I want to talk a lot about this because I think this is a really key one that it really could affect how rides line up down the road. He's no longer with Roush Fenway, and I fully support that decision. I think Greg's still a talented driver. He's one of the older guys in the series currently. I believe he's into his mid-40s.
I was going to say, I think he's 46, I think.
And it's just Roush is not in a position, and frankly, I don't see any writing on the wall that they're going to turn the ship around.
Well, they outside of a hit and miss, I mean, they may. Ricky Stenhouse had a couple decent races. I remember first Dover wasn't too bad, but nobody's continuously running anywhere near the top 10 out of the Roush stable.
Right.
And you've always got Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski running the same engines and always in the top 10.
Right. So
and
you
winning
can't say,
races.
Right, so you can't say it's a manufacturer issue. It's clearly an organizational issue. And it's case in point, after they announced that Greg Biffle would no longer be with the 16 car at Roush Fenway, they also announced the change that Robbie Reiser was out as crew chief. And I think not as crew chief, as general manager. And we talked about that last weekend.
Right.
And frankly, we may hash some stuff that we talked about last weekend. We went on for a while, and so I had to cut a lot out of the show. So we may rehash some of that stuff. Forgive us. But Greg Biffle out at the 16. Now, the rumor has it that he's going to be joining Levine Family Racing as a co-owner. And remember, they picked up Tommy Baldwin Racing's charter. After the Phoenix race when TBR announced that we're folding up immediately. We're no longer going to be racing. That 7 was in action at Homestead, but that was in action under the Levine family banner. So that whole car and that team shifted over to Levine family, and the rumor is that Greg Biffle is going to be part owner in that organization, and he will be driving that second car along with Michael McDowell in the 95.
Correct. So that'll be the 2-car team there. Whether they've got an affiliation with anybody or anything, I don't know. But my guess would be they do. I know Tommy Baldwin had been a crew chief for a lot of years back for Bill Davis Racing, like with Ward Burton, etc. And with that group, with that team back then, and I believe Tommy Baldwin was building their own cars. I don't think they were doing their own bodies, but I think they were doing their own cars. This
day and age in NASCAR, we're learning it through Tommy Ackerman and Lee Ackerman's son, the administrator down at I-80 Speedway at the office. We're learning it through Tommy that a good engineer is worth their weight in gold.
Oh, pass that.
And that's that, like you just said there, it's an understatement. This is, I don't know why it's taken Roush so long to figure this out, but you got to go find, maybe this is the problem, is that you got to go find a young, hungry engineer, and you've got to pay him a lot of money. Because this sport right now, over the last 2-3 years, has become so engineer heavy. And I think that probably had a little bit to do with Hendrick's issue in the middle of the season, and then and Jimmy Johnson and Chad Knaus. 5-6 years ago, when they won 5 in a row, it was a crew chief centered sport. It was all about the crew chief setting up the car, and they're still important.
Oh,
but the crew chief can refine the race. Engineers can find that 10th, and we're watching now. 1st through 20th in the qualifying grid is 0.2, 0.3. The field is so close that an engineer that can find you a 10th will be his weight in gold.
Well, and the engineers, like when you look at a team like Roush, sure they have very smart and very good engineers, but I don't think they're thinking out of the box. I think they're tunnel vision for what the car was 7, 8, 10 years ago. Well, we used to do this. This needs to work. Well, it doesn't anymore.
Right.
Because everything is so different. I mean, when I was in the sport and doing my tech work, when Toyota came into the truck series, Toyota's trucks were so night and day different in their approach to racing than everybody else. The biggest thing we noticed as officials right away was the spring setups they used on the car. We went to a short track in Mansfield, Ohio, and a track very similar to I-80 Speedway except asphalt. And these trucks at 3,600 pounds were lifting the left front tire on the Toyotas. Nobody else was doing it.
Yeah, much like a modified waving at you through the corner.
Or a late model.
Yeah.
But in a 3,600-pound truck. And it was something I'd never seen before, in the races I'd worked, and most of the other guys hadn't either. We had officials that had been there since the first truck race in 95. Mm-hmm. And so we got to, you just ask questions casually with these guys, and they were just running super soft setups in the front that we hadn't noticed anywhere else yet because of where we stood. Mm-hmm. We didn't stand at the end at the outside of the track on turn 1 and 3 where you could watch the fronts move. And then we got to watching films on the stuff, and they had so much travel front to rear. And now you see it with everybody. You can really see it at Martinsville. You can really see it at New Hampshire.
And to point it out, when they come off the corner at Martinsville, if you want to go to YouTube video or whatever, that front end, when the cars come off the corner and they get back into the throttle, that front end will lift 6-8 inches.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the guys that said something about it when they came into the Cup Series was your buddy Tony Stewart. Mm-hmm. Tony Stewart said it was just about knocking his teeth off, for being in the Toyota the first time when they were at Martinsville. And he goes, you go to hit the brakes at Martinsville and you slam that splitter on the front end so hard because they had so much travel in those Toyotas. And that was Toyota's deal. That wasn't any of the other manufacturers didn't do that.
An engineer is the ones that goes out and finds those things nowadays. Correct. That's really where Roush needs to focus. It's easy for us to sit in Omaha, Nebraska and say this is what Roush needs to do. We're not in Concord, North Carolina and seeing what they're actually doing. But the performance is in the pudding that they're behind on the 8 ball. I mean, everything we've said here is an understatement.
Yeah, and they're so far out of it right now. For a team that was on top of the world 6-8 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not anymore. Yeah. I mean, they were Ford's flagship team. It doesn't say Penske Yates Racing. It says Roush Yates for engines.
Right. So. And to give you another example of how fast this sport changes, I remember hearing a story about when Martin Truex Jr. dominated at the Coke 600, right?
Mm-hmm.
He brought another car, that same car. They brought that exact same car for the 600 back to the regular Charlotte race. I believe it was one of the chase races. And just to find out what would happen, they went out there and ran that car on the exact same setup that they dominated that Coca-Cola 600 in. And they were a half a second slower than the rest of the field. Within 10, 15 races, 10, 12 races between the first Charlotte race, the Coca-Cola 600, and the chase race.
4 months, 5 months.
The field had completely passed that Martin Truex Jr. car. They went out and they made adjustments, and they were still a good car. But I remember Cole Pearn saying, we couldn't believe how much slower we were in just one race.
Yeah, but it's not the car. What probably actually changed, and it wasn't all the other guys catching up to them, but the weather and the track.
Yeah.
Were so different from running that night big long race like they ran. When they go back in May, that car might be a second faster than everybody again.
Yeah, true.
You know? It very well could be, but the track was so much different. I mean, that's why they run a Bristol day race and a Bristol night race, because it's like going to two different tracks.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing to watch. All right, we got to take a break. We'll come back in turn number 2 and 3. We've got a great little special lined up for you. Luke Cochran, Stan Cisar, Bob Kosiski, and Joe Kosiski are all going to join Dirk and I in the studio. A couple of weeks ago, about a week and a half ago, we lost a legend in this sport. Excuse me for a minute there. We lost a legend in this sport. Bill Wrich passed away on Saturday, November 18th, and so we wanted to do kind of a memorial show and just get some guys into the studio and kind of share some stories about Bill. I only got to meet him once at the Walk Down Sunset Speedway show, but the guys that are going to join us here in the next two turns were the ones that really got to rub elbows with him, sometimes rub fenders with him, and share the great stories. So you're in for a treat here coming up in turns 2 and 3. And then at turn number 4, we'll come back. We'll wrap up some of the silly season news that has happened so far. We recorded on a Tuesday. Who knows what's going to happen the rest of the week as the week rolls on here in the NASCAR season. We'll be back here on the front stretch.
Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs has taken a page out of IMCA's rulebook and gone crate. These brand new low-emission engines will still have you white-knuckling it all through the Metro's fastest indoor facility. Joe's Karting is now friendly for all skill levels with their brand new Honda-powered engines. It's time to get to Joe's today and find out what drivers like Jack Dover, Shaylee Bate, and Andrew Kosiski have known for years. Located in Council Bluffs and online at joeskarting.com. That's karting with a K.
We're hooked up in turn 2 and still showing the green flag on the front stretch.
Welcome back to the front stretch, heading into turn number 2, and it's time to do the show that we talked about doing last weekend, but just schedules with the holidays didn't work out. Joining us in the studio now for the Bill Wrich Memorial Show, Stan Cisar, the owner of Action Signs and the announcer at I-80 Speedway and Eagle Raceway, Bob Kosiski, a legend of his own in the dirt racing community, and Joe Kosiski, promoter and owner at I-80 Speedway and Kosiski Auto Parts. Gentlemen, how's everybody doing today?
Good.
A little bit of a somber conversation. We're remembering one of the legends that we had on the show a long time ago, a couple of years back for the Sunset Speedway reunion show, and Bill Wrich passed away on November 18th, and you guys went to his services. I wasn't able to make it, so I kind of wanted to do the show a little bit so that the fans who weren't able to make it could kind of share their own stories, and you guys could talk about your time with him. Bob, I wanted to start off with you. You probably raced with him the most. What were some of the memories that you remember of Bill Wrich?
Well, Bill Wrich was a hard racer, a good racer, and he's a clean racer. He'd race you hard, and then we'd have fun afterwards.
Yeah. And talk about racing you hard, just kind of pushing you into the corner a little bit.
He'd make you run hard, and he'd run hard.
Yeah. And that kind of competition had to make you feel like a better driver, too.
Yes, it did.
Just having a guy that could constantly push you like that and make sure that it raised the level for everybody.
Yes, it did. Any
times that it went a little bit too far and you guys weren't so chippy in the pits afterwards?
Oh, as racing, you always have your ups and downs, but seemed like afterwards we always got along good afterwards and everything was okay.
You know, I could always tell that Bob and Bill might have had a little confrontation after the race if they were talking, and Bill was calling Bob Robert. If Bill ever called Bob Robert, then things might be a little tense.
Yeah, and he had that deep growly voice.
Yeah. Now remind me, I remember a story from the Little Sunset Speedway show, or the Sunset Speedway reunion show that we did, of one of the drivers always had to have a ice cream cone after the races. Was that Bill, or am I thinking of somebody else?
That was Keith Lightoff, I think.
Keith, okay.
But I don't think any of the guys back in those days after the races. I think the barley pops were flowing freely, shall we say?
Her ice cream usually said Falstaff.
Yeah.
And the deal is if you eat ice cream after having a few brewskis, evidently it took you didn't notice it so much on your breath. Yeah, remember that. Keep that in mind. Dan.
I'm going to remember that. Not that I ever need to.
No.
Drying up these days. But Stan, talk about some of your memories with Bill Wrich. I know you flagged at Sunset Speedway, and you've been a big part of the community for a long time. So you've got to watch him from the grandstands.
Well, actually, it was my dad that flagged at Sunset Speedway for quite a number of years. But I was out there from the first race back in May of '57, and when I first met Bill, I was probably about as tall as a race tire, And Bill was always a great guy. He was very personable. Always took time to stop by and say hi.
Big man, right? He was 6
remember,
foot.
the competition was really very tough out there even back in those days. I mean, this area had really a stellar group of drivers as it kind of does today. But I mean, it was pretty tough to win out there back in those days, and Bill was one of the toughest competitors. And I remember him being very, very hard driver, and there were some occasions when he might have been set back a spot or two for being a little over aggressive. I don't know.
No way.
No.
and Bill got started off in the coupes, right?
Yes.
About the original dirt racers.
Back, they used to. Bill was from Kennard, and they used to have a track out at Arlington, Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where he got his start. And very shortly after that, they opened Sunset, and he hit the ground running, raced over at Playland, I know, a couple of years. And, he raced, we'll talk later on, but he raced quite a bit throughout the Midwest then eventually.
And way up into the end of this year, I know he was racing in the Gotcha Series when they came to I-80 Speedway earlier this year.
Yep.
So he never really kind of hung up the wheel. It was just unfortunate timing with his passing in the offseason that finally got him to retire.
He loved racing, and after being away from the sport, I think a couple times he got back in, and most currently with the Good Old Time Racing Association with the coupe, he's got a 32 Ford Victoria sedan it's got his same car number, done in the same style that he used to race back in the 50s and early 60s, and he had a great time going out and competing.
What, was he always the 16?
As far as I know, that's the number he's always raced.
Anybody remember why? I always love finding out the stories of why drivers pick their numbers.
My guess would be, I think he was 16 when he started driving, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I think so.
Wow.
And I know I've seen pictures of a 166 that he drove up at Harlan for somebody. It wasn't his car, but it was somebody else's. So
He drove up there for Tom Gully and a couple of them guys.
He drove
Tom
for
Gully and who
For
else was
Darrell
it?
Swanson, he drove for Swanson.
Dale
he drove for
Swanson was
Swanson. I knew
55. That was Dale's number.
Yeah.
But there was a guy he also drove for. I'm trying to think of his name. That had the 116.
Tom Gawley was 180.
Yeah, but there was a number like he's saying another. Maybe
was
Sonny Morgan
one-
was Sonny, not Sonny Morgan, but the Sonny. What was Sonny's name from up there in Harlan that used to race? He drove his car a little bit
The
too.
only 166 that I can remember back at Harlan, back in the old days when they run the 55, 57 Chevys. The guy was from Omaha. His name was Tom Banks, and he raced a 57 Chevy up there, and it was number 166, if I remember.
Joe, didn't
Charlie,
you say a 116?
I was
maybe
thinking it was
that?
116 might have been Larry Hoover's car. Larry Hoover had car number 16. They might have added a 1 at some point in time, when he raced the Monte Carlo for Larry Hoover.
Maybe they made Bill had the 1 to his 16 in order to race up there because Larry Hoover had a 16 already.
Yeah. That could be.
Back in the day, they had to hand score, so everybody had to have a different number.
Yeah.
Not like today where they have transponders.
A's
Everybody
and
can be
B's
number
and
one
C's
because the transponder splits them on the board,
Some days I wish we could go back to that day because seeing the difference between a 40P and a 40B and a 40D is really tough to see going down the straightaway. You don't know which car is which going through there.
Wait till you get to be 66.
I know.
It even gets harder to see, Dave.
It gets Joe. I think it gets worse from here on out.
I can verify that.
What did Bill do for a regular job? Obviously this dirt racing doesn't really pay the bills for a full-time family. What was his regular
Played
gig?
in the dirt. He's a farmer.
Was he?
He was a farmer, yeah.
There for a while, he done some dirt work, excavating work, running a grader.
Still a farmer, I think.
But he's
even
still
up
a
to this
farmer,
year,
yeah.
What about Joe? You remember some stories racing with him? Did you race with him on some competitive occasions, or was it?
I raced with him very little. He was Not really racing around here during my time as much. I raced more with his son Dwight. His son got killed in 2000 at Denison, Iowa, burning a race car. So, after something like that happens, Bill was real dedicated to come back and racing because he raced this all the way up till this year. And I think he actually won an A feature this year. So, at 80 years old, he won an A feature. I think that's pretty dang good.
Stan, were you? I think you said you were announcing that night at Denison that his boy was killed.
Oh yeah,
that Dwight was killed. That was a terrible night, right?
Yeah,
I mean, obviously it was good, but it was.
You would like to forget,
just a.
They were at the fastest part of the track going down the backstretch. He got into it with another driver, and this particular driver didn't lift and had him turned a little bit sideways and got Dwight cartwheeling and flipping down the backstretch. And when the car landed, it caught on fire. And, we were clear across the track in the announcing booth, and our only hope was that he was managing to get out on the opposite side that we couldn't see, and the flames just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And there was the radiator and the gas. They came together kind of in kind of toward the center of the car, and it got to they finally had to drag the car out of the flames because they never could get the flames to go out.
And that kind of experience really had to affect Bill.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that was even though Bill was kind of reliving his racing and kind of spearheading Dwight's racing efforts, when he first started. Actually, the first car that they got for Dwight, Bill started racing out at Sunset, and he happened to have a heart attack after the hot laps of the races one night. And
oh, geez.
And thank God for Speedy Hill at the time. He had great care. They got him to the hospital in time and saved him. And he came back and raced after that. In the meantime, Dwight had gotten started racing. And probably one of the sadder things of the whole ordeal was the week before the biggest race of the year they have up at Shelby County Speedway in Harlan, Iowa, the Tiny Lund Memorial. Dwight Wrich won the feature, and Bill was driving Dwight's backup car and actually ran fourth in the feature. And they were in victory lane together, and in all the pictures and everything like that. And it was quite a deal. And I know Bill was very proud of Dwight, and then to have the things happen, in the forthcoming weeks, it was just,
He never shied away from racing after that. It was more of let's get back at it and carry on his memory. Was that the idea?
I really think so. And, then of course, there were many Dwight Wrich memorial races, at different various tracks in the area. Dwight was very well liked by everybody. He was a great guy. Financial advisor for a lot of people that were involved in racing, myself incled.
Myself,
Joe.
He helped our company get its
really?
first 401k started was Dwight Wrich.
He was a great guy and very very well versed in financing. And it was a shock to everybody, and it was even worse to have to witness it.
Well, didn't he have a radio show too with his finance stuff, like on
He
Saturday
did.
mornings
Yes,
or something?
yeah.
I think it was with Wells Fargo at the time or
Yeah,
something
he
like
was
that.
with Wells Fargo.
Yeah.
Joining us in the studio now, Luke Cochran, the owner of Home Pride Companies and the manager for Home Pride Motorsports. Good year for you this year, Luke. Great to have you in the studio, and we're kind of sharing stories on Bill Wrich. Well, kind of a couple of memories you have. I know you've probably raced with him most recently of the guys in this room with the Gatra Series.
That's correct. I have some white paint on the back bumper of my Gatra car that was installed by Bill.
Bob was just talking about that. He'd push you to the limits and make sure that you were racing your best, and it was hard to get around him.
He, the fire never went out. I mean, he could wheel a car around the track pretty good. Moving back to what they were talking about, Bill having that heart attack at Sunset. He actually was sitting on the tailgate of my pickup truck, and one of my crew guys was standing up, and Bill slumped over on him, and I was on the front straightaway lined up for a heat race. And Larry Pataski came down the front stretch, and they had said, what's the deal? Because the ambulance come pulling out, and they said Bill Wrich had a heart attack. And it's like, what? And then the next time they came by and told me, they said he was gone. And so I jump out of the car and went running into the pits, of course, and left the car in front straightaway, which was reprimanded by Mr. Kelly at the time, adding to my
Start of the outlaw.
Your list
my list of why I have acquired the nickname I have today. But Yeah, hearing about Dwight and I was in the drag races in Topeka. I wasn't at the races in Denison when I heard about it, and then come back and going to the visitation and walking up, and Bill's, Bob's one of my greatest heroes. Bill was one of my greatest heroes. All my heroes when I was a kid growing up were race car drivers. It wasn't Spider-Man or Batman or anything like that. And, and there was Bill standing there, and you walk up and got that big bear hug, and the both of us would be bawling, and Dwight was supposed to meet up with me to actually, because I didn't have a will, and he was always kind of up my butt to get a will made and do some financial planning, which was his forte. I can remember all the way back to the Sunset days. I was 4 years older than him, having to take him to the bathroom when I was about 8 and he was 4, and hating every minute of it. So it goes back a long, long ways. Bill was kind of like my crazy uncle. Mm-hmm. My mom and Randy have been married for better than 30 years now, and prior to that, my aunt and grandma had a restaurant in Blair. So we've been around it a long, long, long time, and most recently, it was at the Dwight Rick Memorial. It was me and Bill dicing it out for the win in our gotcha cars, and I won, and a lot of people were kind of
upset.
Well, they ridiculed me. It says, I said Bill would have never let me win.
Yeah, and
so I think it might have made him mad, in fact. But it's a regret maybe I have. I kind of maybe think that's probably what I should have done. But in the same breath, Bill and I had a lot of. We raced against each other in a Pro-Am car. I raced him door to door one night when we had limited late models at Sunset. We raced each other in gotcha cars, and I feel honored that I got to do that.
Go back to the heart attack situation when they came and said that he's had a heart attack, and they came back and said he's gone. Did he pass away for a few minutes and then they revived him?
Well, by the time I ran over there, they hit him with the paddles in the ambulance, is how I remember it, and revived him. But it still scared the hell out of me.
Yeah, I bet. Those little things, when those things happen in the community, all of a sudden you think, oh, man, we got to start, like you said. Now, after Dwight's deal, you probably went and got a will made up and started working on your retirement.
Actually, I didn't. It kept me from doing it for many years beyond. Really? Because it I can remember racing against Dwight at Harlan a couple of times and being so mad at him, going across the pits actually to kill him. Mm-hmm. And before I could get there, he always called me Luke J, and he'd have his arm around my neck, and you couldn't stay mad at him for very long. But Dwight was a bit like, although Bill was pretty cordially outside the race car.
Bill was a little more gruff than Dwight was.
Dwight was
a little more polished.
Dwight was completely polished, but he'd get in the car and turn into the Tasmanian Devil, and where Bill was kind of the same guy in there out of the car.
Okay.
That's kind of my memory. I always kidded everybody that you could be blind and know if Bill was in the room because he had that voice, that commanding, gruff voice.
He was a big guy too. I remember him being 6 foot, maybe a little over, just like a dominant figure. You knew when he came into the room.
Absolutely.
Or into the pits. For as big as pits can get, you knew when he came into the pits.
Yeah.
We'll take a quick break, and we'll come back at turn number 3. We'll continue to share stories for the Bill Wrich Memorial Show. Luke Cochran joining us, Stan Cisar, Bob Kosiski, and Joe Kosiski. Also, Dirk and I hanging out, sharing stories about Bill Wrich. We'll be back here on the Front Stretch.
Joe's Karting is giving away a Hammerhead ATV to one of its members on December 17th. All you have to do is get to Joe's and do some racing. Purchase a 16-lap Hammerhead race for $20 plus tax and you're in. On December 17th, Joe's will open the registration box and one lucky customer will win a Hammerhead GTS 150 or a Hammerhead Torpedo. Get to joeskarting.com for more details and rules. It's time to get to Joe's Karting and find out what all your friends already know.
Quaker Steak and Lube is helping you end the holiday season with a bucket of cash. Stop in before New Year's Eve, purchase a $25 gift card, and receive a scratch card. You could take home $10,000, wings for a year, or other great prizes. Stop in today, and while you're enjoying all-you-can-eat wings on Tuesday or their weekday happy hour from 4 to 6, make sure you grab a $25 gift card and a scratch ticket for your chance to win $10,000.
Get too quick to stake and lose.
Mid-America Drive, Council Bluffs.
Feather the brake and get back to the gas. Dan and Dirk are headed into turn 3 on the front stretch.
Welcome back to the front stretch. Had to get to turn number 3, and we're continuing to talk with some of the... I tell you, to get all these guys in a room, it took pizza. By the way, anybody that wants to get this group of guys in a room and talk dirt racing, order Domino's. That seemed to be the good luck charm. We've been working on this for a little while. Luke Cochran, owner of Home Pride Companies and Home Pride Motorsports. Stan Cisar, the owner of Action Signs and the announcer at I-80 Speedway. Eagle Raceway, the Nebraska 360 Touring Series, in the Sprint Series of Nebraska. Also, Bob Kosiski, driver of the 53 back in the day. Joe Kosiski, driver of the 53 back in the closer day.
But
and the owner at I-80 Speedway and Kosiski Auto Parts.
But when you order that pizza, order drinks.
Yeah, that's what... Luke, you got here a little bit late. I was offering pops to everybody, but only Joe bit.
I don't drink soda.
That's true. That's a good point. Look at you, always being healthy.
He drinks barley pop, though.
No, don't do that either.
He doesn't drink
Gave
either.
that up too, huh?
I've made that mistake. I've asked him out. I'm like, hey, let's go get some drinks. And he's like, well, I don't drink. You remember me telling you that about 4 times?
4.5 years ago. The only alcohol goes in the race car now.
Good. All right, we're talking the Bill Wrich Memorial. We're talking about Bill Wrich, who passed away on November 18th, and on a Saturday night, Saturday afternoon. Stan, during the break, we were all kind of talking about everything that that Bill raced, and that's going to take the brain power of pretty much the entire room to remember everything that he raced. Because from my understanding, he pretty much hopped in a lot of things.
Well, I kind of followed Bill, for quite a number of years, as I said, since that first day at Sunset Speedway back in '57. Of course, he was one of the toughest guys around back in the coupe days, and they ran anything from a 30 to a 40 coupe. From everything from flatheads and 6 cylinders to the overhead V8s later on, and then finally the coupes morphed into the late model class. And Bill was one of the first guys that jumped on board. He had a Chevelle. Bob had a Chevelle. Jim Wyman, the same guys that were the hitters, Bud Burdick, the same guys that were doing all the winning back in the coupe days, embraced the late model division, and they took over right where they left off with the coupes, and Bill was no exception. He got into that late model deal.
That group of guys is probably the reason why late models was so big for so long in this area, right?
Oh, it was huge, and guys around here could go anywhere and be competitive, You talked about Bob, he's a member of the National Late Model Racing Dirt Car Racing Hall of Fame, as is Joe, I mean, his deal, he could go anywhere and be competitive. We used to go to a lot of races with those guys. We'd travel over into Iowa and race with all their big dogs, and he was always right up toward one of the most memorable races they had was he and Ramo Stott one time over at the Boone Nationals, and Bill Wrich was always there. Bill drove his own cars, as we mentioned before. He drove for Dale Swanson from Harlan, Iowa, for a guy by the name of Tom Gawley, who was a great chassis setup guy and had really good cars. Bill drove those. He drove for Terry Skalberg out of Red Oak, Iowa, and always had pretty good equipment. And if there was a good car out there, Bill was the guy that could push the button and he could get it up front.
And Bob, you raised something again, the late models, and Joe or Stan talked a little bit about being inducted into the Hall of Fame, which kind of made me think a little bit. Did you get inducted into Hall of Fames this year? Did they finally run out of Hall of Fames to induct you into?
No, I didn't get none this year.
Okay, so they've run out of Hall of Fames. We'll have to create a couple of more and keep the streak going. But, you've raced. When did you decide to hop into the late models? Was it about the same time that the late models came around in the area?
Yeah, as soon as Sunset started them that year.
Okay.
I got it in late model.
And Bill was the same. Did Bill and you join the late models the same
Bill
time?
Bill did too. I know Jim Wyman did, and I think Bill did too.
And success right away?
Yes.
It was pretty easy for him.
Yeah.
What are some of the other things that he drove? We talked a little bit about some of the sanctioned NASCAR tracks that we see on Sundays on the Cup Series now that he may have gone and raced at. What were some of those tracks?
Well, Bob and back earlier, like in the '60s, Bob and Bob Burdick from Omaha, those guys were 2 or 3 of the most competitive guys on the national IMCA late model. It was actually at that time they called it, I think, new cars, and it was like the dirt tracks of NASCAR.
Okay.
Back in those days. And
now, Joe, is it similar to what's sanctioned at I-80 right now?
Well, probably close to what would be the same. I mean, the newer cars, the newer body design cars.
Yeah.
So it would be within the most recent 4 years is how I think they went back.
Yeah.
It had to be like a 4-year-old car is the oldest car you could race in that sanction at the time.
And there's been some photos and a story going around the internet here just recently. A guy by the name of Dave Milborn in Omaha, he went to Rosa Novak Chevrolet, bought a brand new 1970 Chevelle, and 2 weeks later it was out racing at Sunset Speedway. And that's the cars we're talking about. They were the most current model year cars.
Okay.
And it was a touring series. They raced at all the fairgrounds tracks. And I know Bob and Bob Burdick raced for quite a number of years. And got some help from Ford Motor Company, I think, just a little bit when you had the Thunderbirds going on. Even raced at Daytona, And that's about the only track I think that Bill didn't actually race. I know he raced with the United States Auto Club, and they were a touring group also, raced at a lot of the big tracks. I know he did race at Pocono with those guys, and his best finish was on a dirt track up in Terre Haute, Indiana, with a 5th place finish in a car that was actually built right here in Council Bluffs, Iowa, competing with all the factory cars and stuff like that.
Let's go around the room while we got a couple of minutes left for the Bill Wrich Memorial Show. I know you, Luke, you shared quite a few memories. Do you have a couple more some of the anecdotal stuff that you remember of Bill Wrich?
Well, one of my greatest memories of the car he was a silver Monte Carlo that I can remember the right side of the car. You couldn't hardly tell it was a Monte Carlo anymore. And, kind of moving forward, Bill kind of taught me that 8 tires work better than 4. So that's one of my memories of him. My stepfather Randy Sterner had a Monte Carlo also, and I think they tried a little harder to keep it looking straight on the right side. But Bill was an aggressive driver, and that's kind of maybe how I patterned my own racing career, was that type of driving, I guess.
Aggressive. You got to attack the corners. You got to be, and sometimes attack other drivers.
And sometimes 8 tires are better than 4.
Patiently aggressive.
Dirk, what about you? Do you have some memories of Bill Wrich?
I can remember watching him, back in the coops when I was a kid, being at the track all the time. And then once I started doing all the tech work, I got to take a peek at his cars a few times. I don't remember ever having to set him down for anything. So, and what was it? He won that track championship in '95, I think, in a limited late model and a Grand National, I think. So would have seen that car a lot that season.
Yeah.
So,
Stan?
Yeah, just the fact that he was a great guy, very personable guy, as tough a competitor. Like Luke said, that fire burned. He wanted to win more, I think, than sometimes a lot more than some of the other guys out there racing who were just racing to have fun. And Bill had that will to win, and just a tough old bird, but a great guy. And we talked about it at the funeral there, seeing Bill at the funeral, he looked like any minute he was going to jump up out of that casket and head out to the race car shop or head out to the barn, and he was one of them guys you thought was always going to be around forever. And it was pretty shocking to hear the news a couple weeks ago.
Bob?
Well, I don't have any one certain race to pick out or anything, but they were all good ones, and Bill drove hard, and we had a lot of good time, got a lot of good races, and had a good time afterwards.
That's the important thing. A lot of fun racing on the track, but then calm afterwards.
Well, back in those days, and it is today, but maybe it's a little more serious in today's standpoint. Racing's a big family, and everybody got together after the races almost on a weekly basis after the races out at sunset, and that carried on until they closed the place up in 2000.
Something that maybe needs to start coming back a little bit.
Yeah, it's
easy with the Facebook and the Twitter that stuff can carry on a lot longer. But I always loved the story of I think it was Luke. You told me you just could not stay mad at the Ricks, whether it be Dwight or Bill. That right after the situation, you go over there to their pits to maybe ruffle some feathers, and they give you a big old bear hug, and you just couldn't stay mad at them.
Well, it's hard to stay mad at Dwight. Bill, on the other hand, the residue would remain somewhat.
Joe, last one.
Some of the memories I can remember of Bill is whenever you was in the room, you'd always hear one time or another, "You bet." And you knew it was Bill Wrich because, Bill had this big, deep voice. I've got a deep voice. Bill's voice made mine sound quiet, I think, most of the time. But Bill was always great voice. You knew when he was speaking. You knew what he was saying. Didn't always have to go along with it, but he was always a great guy to try to go along with the most you could. And I want to say that his son Dwight, me and him grew up like Luke did. We was great friends. When Dwight got killed, I got to be able to hold Bill. As we were sitting there watching the car burn, all he kept saying was, "Why does that have to happen, Joe? Why does that have to happen?" And, I'll never forget that day.
That's tough. That's tough to see. It's tough for us to hear it, but then, Joe, for you to experience it and to Bill for have to go through it, I could never imagine the pain of losing a child. That would just be, I think that's probably one of the worst things in the world, is losing a child.
And that was my biggest memory with Bill, is trying to go through that.
That was one of those deals, when Dwight died. Well, he didn't actually die at the track, but he was in terrible shape by the time they got him out of there. And getting home from the races that night, I think I was up half the night just because you couldn't go to sleep. It was one of those things. That was the first person that I was actually very close to that I ever had to see die in a race car.
Yeah.
It's, knock on wood.
Yeah. Last time.
Hopefully never again.
Yeah. Right, yeah. Hopefully, the safety's come a long ways since then.
Most certainly.
Joe, we were at the Heartland Auto Show a couple of weeks ago looking at the, what's the fire suppression system.
Right, the fire system, yes.
And that's something that a lot of tracks are have mandated, but now they're
getting them close. There's a lot of the promoters, World Outlaws, believe it or not, with Lucas Oil are working together to try to put some of this containment seats. There was a couple of people lost lives this year, one in a fire and one out a window net at Rossburg, Ohio, and they're trying to put some of these rules together. So one was from each series when they lost them, and now they're trying to put some stuff together, and it's they're trying to push it down to all of us tracks, and I want to go along with it as soon as I can make sure the rules are there, but they're having another meeting during the PRI show here, and I guess it'll be a week from this radio show. And I'm hoping to hit a little bit of that meeting up there and try to see if it's something that we can bring back and get into everybody here.
Well, I appreciate everybody taking the time out of their busy schedules. It's the holidays. Everyone's busy trying to get everything done. Luke, Stan, Bob, Joe, always do appreciate it. Dirk, as always. We'll be back in turn number 4 to talk a little bit of NASCAR news. We'll be back here on the Front Stretch.
Are you looking to book your next outing? Look no further than Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs. Located just north of Bass Pro Shop, Joe's Karting can handle outings of well over 100-plus people. Bachelor parties, corporate outings, team building, birthday parties, and much more. Give Buddy a call today and reserve your outing. Joe's will even work with local restaurants to cater your event. Book yours today at joeskarting.com. That's karting with a K. It's time to get to Joe's and find out what everyone already knows.
It's checkers or wreckers as we enter turn 4 on the Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs.
Welcome back to the Front Stretch. Heading into turn number 4. It's just about ready to wrap this baby up. It's brought to you by Quaker Steak and Lube, the official watering hole of the Front Stretch. Man, there's no races to watch today, but there's plenty of NFL on TV, and the big screens are always on at Quaker Steak and Lube with all of the action, whether it be football, baseball is over with. Is basketball going on now, or is that still another month away? I think that kicks off in January, right?
Basketball, is that the orange thing?
Yeah, it's really, it only becomes important in March, and then really that's the only time it's really important for me. That's the only time I ever watch it. I'm really that guy that fills out my bracket based on whose mascot I think is better.
I do jersey colors.
Okay. We're talking a little bit of silly season, and hey, how about that last couple of turns? Some great stories from Bill Wrich. It was great to sit down and kind of tell those stories. I always love sitting around and listening to all you guys tell stories about the old days.
Obviously, Stan and Bob and Joe all grew up with it and were more intent than I was. My dad passed away when I was 8 years old in 1967. I didn't get to spend a lot of time out at the track until I got to be about 13 or 14. Then I'd go up to Rick Holling's house. I'd walk the half mile over there and ride out, and we'd watch his dad race. And Rick would be in the pits, and I'd just sit up in the stands by myself. But I was back at the racetrack. And then, of course, once I was old enough to drive, I was out there all the time. And then started working on cars for everybody and that type of thing. So,
but what a staple in the community, though. There wasn't much negative things to say about Bill. You could read a little bit between the lines that he would ruffle some feathers once in a while, but that's the stuff you love. That's the good old American in you, you know?
Well, when Bob was talking and he'd come over and say, "Hey, Robert."
That was a great story. If you missed any part of that, we'll have it up on YouTube at 10 a.m. this morning. And if you've missed any part of the shows over the last couple of weeks, we've had Jack Dover on the show, Corey Wilson, Anthony Ainsley to get ready for the turkey chase, which was last
the turkey
weekend.
chase, some people were posting up some nice vids of some of the features on Facebook, so I got to see some of the racing. It was pretty decent racing.
Good.
And Anthony ate well. He kept posting pictures of his meals. Somebody posted a picture of him sleeping, so I don't know what that one was all about. Must have been a beef feature.
He must have had a little bit of a food coma going on.
Could be.
And it was after Thanksgiving, so
Yeah.
I think my food coma's worn off by now, but I'm still having I'm still eating leftovers today.
Me too.
I'm going to go home and eat some more leftover turkey, but Wade Unger on the show last weekend, what a character, and that was a lot of fun to talk to him. He comes up every year for the Knoxville Nationals, and we get to sit down and talk with him, and his son was so embarrassed as his dad was sitting there telling us. Yeah.
Dad.
But if you want to get more information on the Ultimate Sprint Car Tour, we're going to post it up on our Front Stretch Facebook page here shortly, so you'll be able to get more information on that. What a great way to get out of the Midwest in January.
Well, to me, for me, logistically, something like that would be a nightmare, with my health issues right there.
You'd have to take a dialysis machine with you, which would probably quadruple the price of going.
Well, I'm sure they've got dialysis in Australia. It would just be setting it all up from the U.S., that would just be a nightmare for me, but that would be something that would really be fun. In all honesty, though, I don't have a big desire to leave the U.S. yet because I've got a lot of stuff here I haven't seen yet.
Yeah. I do like to travel around the world, and Australia is on my list. And now with this, plus, like I just said, it's January. We all know in January that it gets that bitter cold out, and they've lined this up perfectly. It's like the stars are aligning for everybody. That you could go down in January, right when it's typically the coldest, and there's a big snowstorm that hits the Midwest. So you could be out of here watching dirt racing in absolutely gorgeous weather. It's down in the South at that time. It's 80s. Maybe into the 90s. It's absolutely gorgeous.
It's summer. It's south of the equator,
yeah,
so southern hemisphere. So it's summer down there.
Because summers down there is just terrible. Because it's just
it's winter. It's winter down there. The seasons are 180 degrees out. January down there is summer, and July down there is January.
We got a couple more racing notes to talk about before we wrap up today's show. Good news, Landon Castle is set to return to front row racing in 2017. And let's see. Oh, yeah. Clint Boyer decided to sue his former boss. Now, I don't enjoy when somebody sues another person because I think too many people decide they need to sue because it's the cheap way out. It's the latest American way. We'll put it on credit, pay for it later, and if you done me wrong, I'll sue you and I'll get a bunch of money out of it. But I think Clint's got a little bit of a case here.
Yeah, Clint's deal, he's suing for breach of contract and fraud, and literally it's pay he was supposed to get for driving the cars for 2 months. That's like $1.2 million. And then he was supposed to get a $1 million commission payment for bringing 5 different sponsors over to the to H. Scott Motorsports, and he hasn't received that either. So that's what he's going after. At least he was respectful, and he let them come to the second payment, which was due November 20th, so the day after the season ended. And so he let him miss 2 payments. He didn't jump in after the first payment was missed and screw everything up for the last month of the racing season. He waited till the end, did it professionally, but he's got a right to his money.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of been rumored for a while that H. Scott was having some issues and was possibly going to fold the tent.
Mm-hmm.
And Clint said, in the press release, Clint's lawyer said that they are liquidating their assets and they haven't paid Clint. So they want to get in line before the bankruptcy starts and, go from there. He's just protecting what's his, and I got no problem with it at all.
It's unfortunate, and you don't know if Clint's ever going to get this money because one thing is if he doesn't have the money to pay Clint, how's he going to pay Clint through a court?
Well, if he's liquidating assets, the first thing they're going to do is they attached basically a lien to the, what's the thing they got now, the charter.
Yeah.
So if he sells the charter, that money's going straight to Clint. They already attached that. Mm-hmm. So he can't sell that without it. And he's going to sell it. And if he's closing the race shop, he is going to sell that, and that might get $2.2 million.
Well, we don't know how much that's going to get. This is the interesting thing about those charters. It was created to give team owners a little bit more security, something tangible. Because take H. Scott Motorsports, for instance. We just got done in turn one talking about how quickly this sport changes. And if H. Scott decides to fold up and sell, and he sells everything, he's probably not going to get near what he paid for everything, for the chassis, for the bodies, for the tools, for the parts.
He got to use it all. Now it's all used equipment.
Right. So, and plus, it's not, if it was Hendrick Motorsports that was selling out, saying, I'm getting out of the business, he could get top dollar because he's got a top dollar organization.
Right.
H. Scott does not. H. Scott's getting out of it because he hasn't been able to make it work. And so the question with the charter is, it's only worth what other people will pay for it. So I would love to sell my house for $1 million, but if somebody offers me $115,000, which is closer to what it's worth, I'm taking the $115,000 and I'm going home. Now that charter, everyone says it could be worth $1 million. It could be worth $5 million. We just don't know because there is no precedence for how much one of these has been sold. To my understanding,
well, they've been sold, but nobody's promoted or put out there what it's sold for.
Right. To my understanding, only 2 charters have been sold since this system started. Kurt Busch got the very first one in the 41 because he didn't have a charter when it was created at the beginning of the 2016 season. Kurt Busch had not raced that 41 for 5 straight years. He'd only raced it for a couple of years. So Stewart-Haas Racing purchased Michael Waltrip Racing's 56 or 55 charter.
Well, I was going to say, Michael Waltrip's Racing, though, had 2 charters.
Right. They sold the other one to, I think that one went, maybe it is 3. Maybe so Michael Waltrip sold his 2.
So Michael Waltrip sold his 2, and Tommy Baldwin sold 1.
Right. So that would be 3.
H. Scott would be the 4th one. And obviously, they're going to be 7 figures. It's just, and possibly 8, but my guess is 7. And, my guess is on the higher side of 7. So I think if they sell this charter, I think that's why they attached it. They know what it's worth, and there'll be enough money to make it worthwhile.
So maybe Clint will get something out of it. You hate to see that happen. I think for anything, Clint was just so ready for 2016 to be over with, and probably not getting his paychecks that he was due was more salt in the wound. And it was just, you know what? And I don't care who you are. And this always irritates me because I heard a couple of this. Well, Clint doesn't need $2.1 million. He's got plenty of money. Well, let's see you. I mean, it doesn't matter how much money Clint has. Clint is contracted that money. He is owed that money. And let's see anybody, no matter how much money they make, if their employer doesn't pay them, let's see how quickly you go, I don't need it. Never mind. Thanks a lot. The other big news is that Ty Dillon is going to be replacing Casey Mears at Germain Racing at the beginning of 2017. According to Dillon, the deal was done early in 16 and just needed for the season to be over with. Unfortunately, that means that Casey Mears is without a ride. Now, again, we recorded on Tuesday, so Casey may have a ride by then, but it's going to be tough goings because you've heard, and I didn't see this, but I take your word for it, that Geico is probably going to be sticking with Germain Racing, and so Ty Dillon will be racing the Geico machine.
Yeah, I mean, there's been other drivers in the Geico car, so it hasn't just been Casey Mears. But
it'll be really interesting to see how the sponsorship deals work out because obviously Ty Dillon, the grandson of Richard Childress, has been racing for RCR since the start of his NASCAR career. Racing through the K&N Series and up through the trucks, and raced Xfinity last year, challenged for the championship. And with that, Bass Pro Shops, Yingling Light Lager, some of his sponsors have come through the RCR organization, and Ty has helped maintain that. Do some of those sponsors go with Ty? Is this a deal with RCR? Because you and I had this conversation on Facebook that it was kind of shocking to let RCR let Ty go to a competing organization.
Well, I don't think it was shocking that they let him go because they just don't have room for him.
Yeah.
They don't have, he wants to move up, and they don't have the room for him to go.
So the opportunity, and I remember a story years ago that when Dale Sr. first started racing for Richard, their first couple of years, maybe it was just their first season, they were having a tough time getting cars built and of quality cars. They just didn't have the funds and the organizational support to be able to run a full-time NASCAR Cup Series. And I remember Richard telling Dale, maybe it's best if you go and race for somebody else for a year or two, and if you're available, come back when we've got things kind of figured out a little bit. And again, we're dealing with my memory here, but I believe Senior said, no, that's okay. But the offer was there for Richard Childress to tell who would become one of the most influential drivers in NASCAR that he could go and race for another guy. Obviously, it was early in Dale's career, but the talent was there. Dale was winning right off the bat. I'm not surprised at all that conversation could have happened. We don't know what exactly happened. Maybe Ty just said, well, Granddad, you don't have room for me. I'm going to go race for Jermaine.
I've got this offer.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take it. And, in my opinion, I don't think Ty's as talented as his brother.
I agree.
I really don't. And
I've been turned off by those two a lot. When I was at Kansas and when we've been to Iowa, listening to their race radios, I really do hate that when people say, the Silver Spoon boy, they've been given everything, they've yada yada yada. Well, there's a lot of that in this sport, that they're where they're at because they've had a wealthy family or they've had the right connections or whatever. If you're going to scream the Silver Spoon corn, then you can go with Dale Jr. He's made a lot of his opportunities, but he probably wouldn't be in the Cup Series had it not been for his family name. But my point is that both of those boys, Ty and Austin, have rubbed me the wrong way by the way they act to their crew. And they just say, just rude things. You say, well, Kevin Harvick attacked his crew at whatever race that was when they coughed up the win. Well, that's coming off of a mistake, and he's given some hard love to his crew. But the way that those two talk to their crew chiefs, to their spotters, it's just disrespectful, and I really don't like it. So I've lost a lot of respect for those two.
Well, you saw Kurt Busch go through that for a lot of years.
Right.
He's finally grown out of it. Kyle was the same way. He's finally grown out of it. Everybody snaps at their
what was it, Greg Biffle that was screaming at Texas that year that his air conditioner broke? And he said he couldn't talk for 2 days afterwards because he was screaming so much at his crew. He was just so fed up and so cranky and just so exhausted. I've heard race audio when it comes out on Tuesday or Wednesday on Facebook, and they play the audio. I lost respect for Kurt Busch after the Dr. Jerry Punch deal, after the countless things that he did, but he's gained it back. So there's always opportunities, but those two just really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But when we've talked to them, they've always been great to us, so I guess I shouldn't hold too much against them.
Yeah, I've had very little conversation with either one of them. We've never been able to lock down an interview with them,
I thought we interviewed him that one time with Brendan Gaughan. Remember we interviewed Brendan and Ty when they were over at Iowa Speedway?
Must have been before me. Must have been. Yeah.
I thought that was with you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was 3 years ago, just the year before you joined. But I thought that was you. Oh, well, again, my memory. All right, we got to wrap it up. But the case of that story, though, Casey Mears out at Germain Racing. It'll be interesting to see where Casey lands. He may be able to go and pick up a ride somewhere as a veteran, because he's definitely a veteran, and he has definitely helped pick up Germain Racing to a new level with some pretty good finishes this year and over the last couple of years. He's got the experience, he's got the information, so he may be he may be a pretty good asset to a team or an organization. Be interesting to see what happens with that. If you missed any part of today's show, make sure you head over to the YouTube page and just search Front Stretch December 4th. And we always title them that way, and then whoever you want to hear after that. You can always just search by the driver, crew chief, or promoter, owner, track, whatever, and we'll always have audio from a lot of the people. You can go back and listen to that Ty Dillon interview when him and Brendan Gaughan were over at Iowa Speedway, early promoting an Iowa Speedway race, and they were playing kickball. They were playing kickball, and I believe somebody got Jimmy Small in the pit lane. We'll say he got him in the pit lane. I believe that was the story we were all laughing about. So if you get an opportunity, go listen to that. We'll be back next weekend to do it all over again. This has been The Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting on AM 590, Omaha's ESPN Radio.
The official watering hole of The Front Stretch has you covered any day of the week with the best wings, great burgers, and amazing steaks. Each weekday from 4 to 6 is happy hour, featuring $1 off draft and well drinks plus $4 Luberitas. Mondays are kids' night. Tuesdays are all-you-can-eat wings for $12.95, and the lube even delivers to the Council Bluffs area. Like Quaker Steak and Lube Council Bluffs on Facebook for a full list of weekly events.
Get to Quaker Steak and Lube.
Mid-America Drive, Council Bluffs.
Are you looking to book your next outing? Look no further than Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs. Located just north of Bass Pro Shop, Joe's Karting can handle outings of well over 100 plus people. Bachelor parties, corporate outings, team building, birthday parties, and much more. Give Buddy a call today and reserve your outing. Joe's will even work with local restaurants to cater your event. Book yours today at joeskarting.com. That's karting with a K. It's time to get to Joe's and find out what everyone already knows.